I'd like to call it. Got it. I'd like to call the committee meeting to order. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of January 9th, 2023, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, which we've done. We'll provide a recording of this meeting, which we're doing, linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So staff has some additional virtual meeting logistical announcements before the roll call. Can I turn it over to staff?
Yes, good morning, everyone. This meeting is being recorded. Please use the mute function when not speaking. This will help eliminate excessive background noise. You can use the mute button on your computer, or those of you on your phone can press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. Members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box, which staff will be monitoring. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, you can indicate your desire to do so in the chat box. Members of the committee, when making a motion, please include your name so staff can properly record it. This concludes the meeting announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. If staff could now take the roll call.
Sure. Bob Tucker.
I am here.
Kim Porter let us know she would not be here.
Present. I made it.
Great. Good morning, Kim.
Hey, thanks, Kim.
Good morning. I'm going to be on mute because I'm driving, but good morning.
Glad you could make it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Adam Ballard.
Present.
Dion Bowe. Peter Creticos.
Here.
Christy De Laurentiis.
Present.
Joan Fox.
Present.
Kendra Freeman. John Furr.
Here.
Kevin Kramer. Marissa Lewis.
Present.
Tiffany McDowell.
Present.
Shannon McGee. Michael Myers. Josh Potter.
Here.
Obayi Reed. Caitlin Ritter. Darnell Shields. Jennifer Tamman. Michael Horsting.
Here.
And Tara Orban. Okay, I believe we do have a quorum.
And Elizabeth, I was admitting Kevin to the room when we were taking roll.
Perfect, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Dominic. Well, let's move on then. So we do have an agenda change in consideration of members who may not be able to stay for the entire meeting. I would like to move item 4.03, job quality and assessment, ahead of item 4.02, an update on the plan of action for regional transit. If there's an objection, please voice it now. Great, hearing none, I'm going to move on. I do have a couple more announcements. First, a committee member announcement. Veronica Gonzalez has stepped down from the committee. We thank her so much for her service and look forward to a new member joining the committee soon. And then second, I'm really happy to tell all of you that Elizabeth Ginsburg has joined us as a committee liaison. I've worked with Elizabeth before. She is brilliant, she is thoughtful, and she is really good at what she does. So we are very lucky as a committee to have her, as we have with all of our CMAP support staff in the past. Elizabeth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I don't know if I can follow that fairly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Ginsburg. I'm a senior policy analyst here at CMAP. I've been here for about 1.5 years. And prior to coming to CMAP, I worked in planning consulting, doing development feasibility and market analysis work to support local economic and community development. And prior to that, I worked for many years at the Chicago Community Loan Fund with Bob. So excited to work with you all this year.
We're excited to have you. Great. So are there any other agenda changes from anyone? Happy to consider those now. All right, hearing none, let's move on to the next item. We are always so lucky to have Executive Director Erin Illman, and she's with us today, and she has a few words for us. Erin?
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much, Chairman Tucker. And thanks for welcoming your new committee liaison. I know we appreciate Elizabeth Ginsburg as well and know she'll be a great liaison to the committee alongside Dominic. So as we start our new year, I just wanted to begin by thanking each of you for being a participant in the regional planning process. You know, hearing from you is just so critical as we develop our projects, our programs, our work plan, but not just the insights and sort of the work, but also helping us support the execution, the implementation of these activities across the region, really, as we develop our 2050 plan. It's about all of the strategies getting implemented. And sometimes we're not the best agent to implement them, and your organizations are. So for that and for those partnerships, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you. I just got back from DC. I was at the National Association of Regional Councils annual meeting where I was able to hear from folks on the Hill from a number of the different agencies. You know, they often have EDA and DNR and, NOAA was there, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, talking about some of the work that they have going on, as well as USDOT. One of the things that I was excited to do while I was there was to share with them a new booklet that we have on our priority transportation projects for all of the competitive funds that are available. These are multi-million-dollar projects across our region, things like Chicago Union Station, 290, the Red Line Extension South, that our region is working collaboratively on and in pursuing funds from the feds to help support the implementation of those projects. So we had good meetings with all of our delegation. Always a busy time being on the Hill, but fun to be there. A lot of them are thinking about, the nexus of transportation and land use and the regional economy and climate change and equity. So a whole lot of insights from our committee, our congressional delegation in that regard. I think on your agenda today, with regards to thinking about this next year, we will be engaging you in a discussion on the committee's work plan for the year. Again, that critical relationship that we have with you is just so important. And so, thinking about how this committee can help influence, help cajole, help us get some of our recommendations done or moving forward substantially is always just top of mind for me. So as a committee of the CMAP board, your expertise also helps influence their work and help support them as they make decisions and enact, make recommendations and approve things moving forward. You heard you get a little shuffling around on your agenda here, but part of the big projects that we have going on this next year is really meeting a legislative mandate to look at the future of our transit system. We're calling it the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, or PART. Ramped up this month with a steering committee of business, civic, labor, environmental organizations as mandated by the legislation. But you'll be hearing more about this. I think, in a region as large as ours, I'm sure you heard the headline that we are the most congested U.S. city. Transit is a really critical component to us thinking about our congestion and our mobility. So the recommendations coming out of this, going to the General Assembly, I think will be helpful for all of us across the region as we think about workforce and how we make sure that families can get to the places that they need to go. And then my last little note here too is just on the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership, which launched again earlier this month. It brings together the 7 counties and World Business Chicago to advance our shared prosperity through regional economic coordination, economic equity, and growth. And I think that you'll be hearing directly from Tony Mano about a tool that we've been developing on job quality and access that should help local communities understand the labor force and their industries in that local context. So excited, you've got a great agenda today. Thanks as always for letting me kick it off here and share a few insights. I'm always happy to answer questions if there are any.
Fantastic. Any questions for Erin? All right. Erin, thank you so much, as always. I see that Austin Edwards has joined us today. I can't wait to receive, Austin, your very detailed critique of this meeting later. Let's move on to the approval of the minutes. A copy of the minutes from November 21st, 2022 were included in the meeting packet. We're going to spend some time in our meeting discussing the minutes to ensure continuity. Staff is going to share some insights now.
Thank you, Chair Tucker. We look forward to adding this part to our agenda to continue the continuity of the meeting. Some highlights from the November meeting on which we will continue the discussion today include that Alex Enzyme, CMAP Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation, provided an update on CMAP strategic direction plan. Enzyme noted one of the assumptions to be considered and updated is thinking of housing as an economic asset rather than a need. And today we will be discussing a tool that can assist with leveraging and targeting investment, identify equitable access to jobs, and balance housing needs and job opportunities as they relate to local economic development decisions. Also at the last meeting, Elizabeth Scott, CMAP Principal, provided an update on the PART program. She noted that any recommendations and strategies eventually forwarded to the state legislature as part of this program must fully incorporate and consider racial equity, climate change, and economic need. We will hear more about PART today. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you for that, Dominic. Really appreciate it. Are there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
This is Kevin. I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there a second?
Marissa will second.
Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate that. Are there any questions on the motion? All right, hearing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Bob Tucker,
Yes.
Kim Porter,
Yes.
Adam Ballard,
Yes.
Peter Pedicos,
Yep.
Christy De Laurentiis,
Yes.
Joan Fox,
Yes.
Kendra Freeman,
Yes.
John Furr,
Yes.
Kevin Kramer,
Yes.
Marissa Lewis,
Yes.
Tiffany Dowell,
Yes.
Josh Porter,
Yes.
Darnell Shields.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 4.01. Our next item is the proposed 2023 committee work plan and committee engagement. Staff is going to provide us with an overview.
Thank you, everyone. I'll start and then hand it off to Stephanie Pfeiffer, our Deputy of Planning. Over the 4 meetings we have scheduled over the course of this year, we will organize the content according to the 2 regional economy objectives identified in CMAP's strategic direction. Those are, of course, increased inclusive growth and increased access to opportunities. We'll make sure any relevant content is also coming to you, or timely content. But this is just a part of an attempt to kind of organize our meetings and our time together, and also relates to a larger kind of direction for the committees. Stephanie, you want to take it from there?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning, everybody. As Elizabeth said, I am Stephanie Pfeiffer. I'm the Deputy of Planning here at CMAP, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. As Aaron mentioned, the CMAP really values and continuously seeks to improve the way that we interact and leverage the expertise that's on our committees. We really appreciate all that you bring to the table. You have a lot to bring to the table. You have both personal and professional perspectives, and you also represent different professions and constituencies that can really be key as we value your input on our work moving forward, and how do we navigate the region's economic challenges and taking advantage of those opportunities. So we really appreciate you being on this journey with us. We also recognize that your time is very valuable, and given all of the knowledge that's in the room, we want to get the most out of these meetings and our time together to make sure that we're engaging in meaningful ways. So we really want to spend less time presenting and more time discussing. So this can be challenging, especially in a virtual environment. So over the next year, we are going to try some new approaches to try to get the most out of these meetings. To that end, the staff is committed to connecting the conversations, so tying back the conversations that we're going to have today with the previous meetings, similarly to the way Dominic did when he highlighted from the minutes from the prior meeting. Also, we're going to strive to, as Elizabeth said, provide more videos, materials, and discussion topics to you before the meeting, so that you can, look at those materials ahead of time, and then we can spend more time in the meeting actually having those meaningful discussions. We also really want to try to bring you into part of those conversations and those discussions. So bringing committee members into those initial presentations, we're going to be doing a little bit of that today as Tony talks about the tool. Another thing is we're going to try to be turning off the PowerPoint. And so the more we can focus on each other rather than on the screen, we think that'll give us more opportunity to really have those sort of meaningful conversations. But with that, we would also ask the committee to engage with your liaisons. Elizabeth and Dominic can be a great resource, and so encourage you to reach out to them, build those relationships. They're a resource for you in anything that you need that CMAP can provide, as well as we want it to be a two-way street. We want to be there to provide support to you as you are supporting us in these committees. Also, we ask that you review those materials that we give you before the meeting and come ready to be engaged. And if there is a topic that you see coming up that you're particularly tied to, if you want to volunteer or if asked, agree to be part of those presentations. And with that, I want to give a big thank you to those of you who will be participating in one of today's presentations. Also, we really want to encourage everybody to leave their cameras on when possible. It really does help change the dynamic of the conversation if we can all see each other, even in this virtual world. And then lastly, with regard to content, in the past, we reported out on a lot of great work which we have accomplished. We will continue to keep you updated and apprised of our work and our successes. But more importantly, we want these conversations to be focused on the development of future efforts to advance strategic direction outcomes. So as Aaron said, how are we implementing the things that we've already set forward as goals? And then are there things that we should be doing to try to advance those? And for all of you, we would love for you to enhance our content by bringing your own organization's goals and activities to the agenda through the committee member updates portion of the agenda. So encourage you to maybe think about that before each meeting and what can you share that would be helpful to the rest of the group. But overall, we want to ensure that the committee is a valuable asset to each of you as well as to the agency. We want to be building relationships, stimulating conversations, and promoting efforts to achieve a robust and inclusive regional economy. And to that end, we're going to try a few things out. If you know of other best practices that we should try to make these conversations even more engaging, please let Elizabeth and Dominic know, and we're happy to try out some new things. And we'd also love your feedback on the things that we do try. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, that's great stuff, Stephanie. Really, I think that's all terrific. But do we have questions from the committee for Elizabeth or Stephanie? All right, since this is actually a work plan and hearing no questions, can I get a motion and a second for approval?
I'll motion, Joan
And I'll
Fox.
second.
Hey, thank you. And was it Kevin who seconded, I believe?
Yep.
Great. Any questions on the motion? All right, hearing none. Can we get a roll call, please?
Bob Tucker,
Yes.
Kim Porter,
Yes.
Adam Ballard,
Yes.
Peter Creticos,
Yes.
Christy De Laurentiis,
Yes.
Joan Fox,
Yes.
Kendra Freeman,
Yes.
John Furr,
Yes.
Kevin Kramer,
Yes.
Marissa Lewis,
Yes.
Tiffany McDowell,
Yes.
Josh Porter,
Yes.
Darnell Shields.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Excellent. Now we're moving on to item 4.03. As I announced at the beginning of the meeting, we're moving this up just a little bit. CMAP will share the recently completed inclusive growth analysis and illustrate how the accompanying jobs access and quality assessment tool can be used. Tony, my friend, I believe you're going to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Chair Tucker. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everyone today. I'm Tony Mano. I'm Principal Planner here at CMAP in the Planning Division. Thanks for being here today. Can we go to the next slide, please, if possible? So at our May meeting, I believe it was the May meeting, Austin went over a few of our efforts related to regional economic coordination, including the partnership that Aaron mentioned earlier this morning, as well as the strategic assessment of our region's industries with the help of the consulting firm TIP Strategies. One major component of this analysis is a new innovative tool on job quality and access that is meant to help local communities and economic developers across the region improve our competitive position. Next slide, please. This tool is designed to help the region better understand the local labor force and industries in context. It provides an overview of employment trends in key industries and analysis of their job quality and accessibility, such as level of education required. It's a piece of a larger puzzle that we hope is useful as we look at leveraging the assets in our region. The next slide, please. So as Stephanie mentioned, we're going to try something new today, and I enlisted the help of a few of our wonderful committee members to take the tool for a test drive and report back today. The things that they found were hopefully useful for their work, any gaps, and provide any feedback here, hopefully that will spark discussion. So I would really like to thank Dr. Tiffany McDowell and Marissa Lewis, Peter Kretikos, and Kevin Kramer for agreeing to do this with me. I'll say agreeing. I did ask them to do it, and so I hope they didn't feel obligated, but they were excited to do so. But what I'd really like to do now is just turn it over to them to talk through their experience with this tool. If we could turn off the PowerPoint, that would be great. I don't have any more slides, or if everyone wants to slide their screen over, whatever's easiest. Oh, wonderful. Okay. So I think we'll start with Dr. McDowell. And if you wouldn't mind, just maybe give us a quick overview of your work and how it could relate to this. And then we'll go Dr. McDowell, Marissa, Peter, Kevin, in any order. But hopefully there'll be some great discussion. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. McDowell. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to try to get my camera. I'm on my phone because my computer is a little weird. So good morning, everyone. And I'm really excited to be asked to talk through this because it was really interesting and I really love the tool. One thing I was talking to Tony about was that, you know, in my line of work, I actually am the director of the Equity Institute at YWCA Evanston North Shore. And so we provide a lot of support to community organizations, municipalities to think about how to incorporate an equity lens into their work, both internally and support communities. And so we've been doing a lot of work to support their city government and city officials to think about some of the that they're using to both engage residents, but also think about the distribution of resources and power across the city. So this tool definitely is interesting at the time because we've been having a lot of conversations about the way that data is shared across the city and the way that data is used by the decision makers. So it was really interesting to kind of use that lens because that's a project of ours. And I think just in general, because of my work to support you know, nonprofits, you know, trying to think from that lens as well as like how would a nonprofit partner or, you know, folks like myself who are interested in using this data to be able to, I'm getting a note to turn off my camera, so I will do that.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you, but thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So, as I was looking through the tool, one of the things that I was really excited about was, you know, thinking about what job quality and job accessibility means. So the definitions of those terms. And I also, though, felt like that might be a challenge to folks who are newer to this work and this language. So I was wondering if there could be a way to tie the reports or to link the reports to the dashboard. So then that way people could have access to the reports and to the plans that led to this data analysis happening. Then going into the mapping, I really enjoyed that you could drill down into the community areas and the zip code area or zip code level. I feel like that's going to be really important for people in communities to have a better snapshot and better picture of what this looks like for their communities. I'm interested to know, you know, I feel like there may be ways, I did see that you can download snapshots of the data for your community area, zip code area, which is great. County level, zip code level, which is great. I do still feel like this tool may be best used by people who are, you know, used to looking at data and clusters in this way. I'm not sure if folks are, or the folks I work with are there yet. So this is not necessarily on the tool, but it's about how it gets rolled out. I appreciate engaging those of us on this committee to take the run through. So I feel like creating some type of engagement strategy for like how people can use it, who the spokespeople are, you know, making sure that there are people on the ground who can help folks see the utility of it, and also, you know, making sure that the key points get pulled out, because I feel like there could be a number of hypotheses that you could pull forward, but it would take the person to have to really understand that, to know that from this tool. So yeah, that was it. I'm happy to answer questions, but I would love to hear from, you know, my colleagues on the committee and see what else came up.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And I think it's a great idea to see if we can pull out the pieces of the inclusive growth analysis that do talk about the tool in a little bit more detail, especially defining what job quality and job accessibility means for this tool and the methodology behind it. So we'll definitely look into that. There is the companion analysis document that TIP put together, but it's quite long because it also lays out a handful of industries and strategies within each one. So pulling out those pieces and making sure that they are accessible right along with this tool is great feedback. So I really do appreciate that. Any questions for Dr. McDowell? Thank you so much. Marissa, would you like to weigh in on your experience?
Sure, thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Lewis, and I am the board liaison and chief policy officer for the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. And so we are a workforce development organization. And so when I came to this tool, I kind of took a scenario in mind to the table of one of our own kind of existing projects. And then tried to put myself in the mind of like how I would use this tool for one of our existing initiatives. And so everything I did kind of filters through that. So I'll explain the initiative, and then I'll kind of tell you some of the feedback that I had about the tool. So one of our recent projects that we've launched is called the Good Jobs Challenge. So we got a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and we have been putting in place under this grant 4 different sector partnerships in 4 high growth sectors in Chicago and Cook County. And at these sector partnerships, they're essentially sort of roundtables that include employers, training providers, industry associations, supportive service providers, and employers will come to the table with specific requests or specific pain points or needs or challenges filling jobs. And then the sector partnership will sort of work together, bring training providers to the table, work out a curriculum, and the employer will commit to essentially hiring folks through this program. And so there is a real focus on job quality and accessibility in our Good Jobs Challenge work. And so I was happy to kind of take this tool for a test drive with that in mind, with that program in mind. So we are at the early stages of our work under that grant. And my intention was to kind of run through all 4 of the sectors, but I did one, which was healthcare. And I kind of put myself in the mind of, okay, if I were running one of these sector partnership meetings under the healthcare sector and wanted to bring to the table some data around job quality and accessibility, how would I use this tool to support that? And so and Tony, at one point we had talked about you either showing screenshots or me sharing my screen, or I can just talk.
If you want to just talk, that's fine. I can drop that. I can drop that snapshot into the chat so people can see it if you'd like. What do you think is easiest?
I don't know. You decide. So I'll just say it, and then if it seems like it's if it could use a visual, then go for it.
Okay.
Okay. So for those of you who looked at it, there are, I want to say, like 3 different tools that you can use under this tip strategies kind of larger tool. And the one that I focused on was the job quality and access grid. So I didn't spend as much time in the mapping, but it sounds like Dr. McDowell did. So we're all kind of, between the 4 of us, I'm sure we will have covered everything. But the other one I skipped over is the cluster analysis. And I just wanted to make a point of that. So as a workforce organization, I know that CMAP is sort of based on the idea of clusters because so much of economic growth is based on how sectors are interrelated with each other and how the the supplier relationships and how what happens in one industry really affects other industries. So in workforce development, I don't want to speak for the entire workforce development field, but at least for me, I don't think about clusters as much. We're a little bit more focused on occupations or occupational groups because at the end of the day, we're about job skills and training and placing people in jobs. And that is much more centered on kind of what the occupation is, what the employer needs are, and less of an issue. We're less concerned with kind of these macro interrelationships between industries. So I didn't do much with clusters on this one, and I actually don't do much with clusters on a daily basis. So I kind of skipped that one. I wanted to mention that though. But I love, so I thank you for sharing, Tony. So this is that tool that I did spend time with. So that was the job quality and access plotting tool. And this was just a screenshot of one of the analyses that I did, so that I done. So I mentioned healthcare. You can see all these drop-down menus. It doesn't show you under occupation group which ones I chose because, and I actually appreciated this, it allowed you to select multiple. And so there are 2 occupation groups that have to do with healthcare. So I picked like the healthcare technicians one and then the healthcare providers one or something like that. So I could get a full picture of the full industry or the full occupation group, I should say. So I did, that was one part of the tool I appreciated. And then I picked for region selection, Cook County, because we're a Cook County facing organization, but I also appreciated the ability to kind of look at the entire CMAP region or to compare us to other counties. So that was very valuable. And then kind of didn't pay attention to the cluster drop-down menus there. So I love this visual. It adds a great dimension to the data that we usually rely on. So if I were to start a conversation about the demands in a certain industry sector, so we'll say healthcare, I would probably rely on mostly like projections data. So and kind of other data available from the federal government around, educational requirements, projected openings, to kind of hone in on what we thought were kind of the highest demand occupations in a sector. And we kind of go from there and of course take employer feedback into account and some other things, but we'd really start with that projections data. So I appreciated this additional kind of lens that we could look at these occupations. So this includes these 2 sectors of accessibility and job quality. I will say, I actually am just learning about that companion document that you mentioned, but I will second, I believe, Dr. McDowell, you were talking about how it'd be nice to have some definitions, if that's what you were saying, and I agree. So, I don't want to just take, some people may, I'm glad that this is not too bogged down with definitions because depending on the audience, that may be a little bit, maybe too much in the weeds. But for me, I would like to know what constitutes something that is a high quality job versus low. And I would like to constitute, on the left, I don't know if you can see it, but on the y-axis, it's a job accessibility continuum. But then it says that the 2 directions you can go are more equitable and less equitable. And to me, accessibility and equity are 2 different things. And so I'd really like to know what is baked into those definitions before we go around just declaring that a specific occupation is equitable. I wouldn't feel comfortable sort of declaring that unless I knew what that was based on. Another thing I will note is that, okay, so this is an image and not a live, tool right now, but this is just a little tiny technical thing. So I like the quadrant because it allows you to hone in on like, okay, I want to focus on the most equitable, highest quality jobs, for example. But if I was moving my mouse on the screen and I moved it over the quadrant itself, those, what would you say, like that grid goes away. The visual grid goes away and I couldn't figure out how to get it back. I feel like that's just a programming glitch, but I wanted to mention that. Not a deal breaker, but I did like having the grid there for visual assistance. I am almost done here. Let's see. One more thing. Okay. Just because I happen to pick healthcare occupations for my test drive, I wanted to, so let's say I was looking at those that were the most equitable and the highest job quality, and some of these tiny bubbles, so I know it's not live, but like, let's say I was going to click on some of these tiny bubbles in the upper right-hand quadrant. What you might see is, I don't know what these, if you hover over one, it would tell you what the occupation was, right? So let's say one of them was pharmacy techs. I don't know that it was, but just as an example, let's say that it was. Let me think if this is a good example. So it's saying that it's accessible, but if you were to, what's not included in this bubble is how many openings there are. So I already mentioned that we kind of only rely on openings, and that's not it doesn't tell the whole story. But then at the same time, these might be such tiny occupations that in Cook County, there's only projected to be like 20 openings a year. So I'm not sure that I would call that a super accessible occupation because it's such a small occupation in terms of numbers. And then the other thing is, because I happen to click on healthcare, we all sort of know that the educational requirements are one thing, but then on top of that, there's professional licensing requirements that are not included in this information either. So, you might look, there's a drop-down menu for entry-level education. And so you could search for things that you need less than a bachelor's degree to go into. And what you get is a bunch of occupations that it might seem like you could just waltz in with a high school diploma, but you actually don't. You need to attend an accredited program. You need to pass a licensing exam. You need to get a certain number of hours. So those are not included. And so in this analysis, and I don't think that it's possible for them to be because every occupation is different, but I was talking to Tony about like, maybe there could be a footnote or something that's like, just a note, these do not include any additional professional licensing requirements because that, those are barriers to entry. They take time and they take money and, might make a job less accessible than all the criteria that was assessed here. So that was it. I loved it though. I can't wait to spend more time with it and I think we will use it. So that's a ringing endorsement, but thanks for asking me to do this.
Thanks, Marissa. I really appreciate that. And just in the spirit of full transparency for everyone, when I did speak with everybody about this, I did ask for honest feedback too. This wasn't, just to be an exercise in hyping up the tool. We did actually want everybody to dig in and let us know if there were some gaps or some things missing. And I think that shows that while it can be useful and is useful for a lot of you in the work that you do, I think one thing that we will think about at CMAP is how we can find other tools or other data sets to add as a companion to this so we can make sure that people know that if you run some snapshots for this, make sure you're also looking at other indicators as well and come to your own conclusions about, the work that you're doing through this tool. So thank you so much. Maybe Peter, if you have a few thoughts you'd like to share, or if there's any questions for Marissa, excuse me. Sorry, maybe I should stop there for a second. Okay, Peter, thank you.
Sure. And I apologize if you hear a barking dog in the background. One of our two just likes to randomly bark for whatever reason. So we don't know what goes on in his pea brain. Tony, thanks for letting me sort of weigh in on this. Most of my comments are going to be more high level, although I'll probably, in some respects tag on to the other two sets of comments. The first thing that kind of struck me is sort of the question of use of language. And I appreciate that there's a sort of a tradition in academia, planning, whatever, in terms of sort of commonly used phrases and terms. And as the first thing that kind of hit me was this idea of quality jobs. Because it strikes me that there's a sort of there's a judgment as to what's a high quality job and what's not a high quality job. But if you're in that job, you're not thinking about the quality of the job. You're thinking about it being a job or an occupation. And I think it just bears some attention to the use of language. I threw out the idea of sort of substituting the word robustness, or robust jobs, or things of that nature, because it strikes me that when we then start to put together policies, we tend to gravitate to, quote, the things that are high quality, without really appreciating that, irrespective of what we think of the job, it's important to the individual who's in it. And then also in terms of sort of these measures of lower and higher, same sort of thing. On the accessibility question, one of the issues for me that I've continued to hone in on in some of the work that we've been doing, is it's not just accessibility in terms of how do you get into the employment, but also whether it's, how do you need to assess proximity. So if I'm sitting in Little Village and all the manufacturing jobs that I'm interested in Bensonville, those aren't necessarily accessible. I may have the training, I may have the skills, I may have the competencies, but I don't have a means to get there easily with, short of, 3 buses or carpooling, which is a strategy. So proximity, transportation access, things of that nature, so that if we're committing ourselves to maps, as we are in some of this, knowing how that form of accessibility plays into it, and then also with respect to accommodations to disabilities. So those don't seem to be in the consideration right now in terms of what defines something as accessible or not. And then a little bit further, and this is a theme that others have just stated, knowing the methodology really is important. Because one of the factors identified in the write-up on this is impact on historically underrepresented communities. And that has a weight that I don't know what that weight is. So when I'm looking at something in terms of it is, okay, yes, these are, construction is the big obvious one that always gets talked about. I mean, if there aren't if there aren't women in construction, Blacks are underrepresented in construction. Some of that has to do with again, proximity, and access to transportation, and other sorts of things. But and then historically, in terms of whatever animus that may exist between historically with maybe some trades and employing people of color, that's a factor. But it's something that, if I'm looking at it from a workforce perspective, my focus is going to be on the training piece of this. And so it's something that if we have a better sense of how that is factored in, then we have a better sense of how to judge the idea of accessibility. Also, and this is sort of to Marissa's point, knowing one way in which you can start tying in something actionable is crosswalking the occupational information with ONET. That by itself will start providing, give you a whole list of understandings in terms of the knowledge, skills, attributes, and so forth. And you can layer in on that licensing, that if you can crosswalk that in to the occupational data information, that would be really useful. 2 areas that I think are kind of blind spots that need to be addressed, I think, in some fashion. One is the effect of automation and all this information. You know, there was a study that was released a few years ago by the OECD that essentially put, you know, vulnerability, you know, job vulnerability and automation into some sort of into 4 quadrants. It's a handy tool. The methodology is accessible with respect to OECD. So you can look at an occupation, you can understand what's the vulnerability it has to automation. And then also, if you apply that against measures in terms of whether the employment and occupation is going up or down, or that industry is going up or down in terms of overall employment, then you can get a sense in terms of robustness of what that occupation looks like over time. And so I think that that's a dimension that's not addressed at all in this. It's sort of like the static notion of what the job is today, without having a sense as to what the future of that job may look like as you're going down. Similarly, you know, it doesn't take into account remote work, and in specifically the kind of remote work where the employer may not even be in the US for that matter. And not to mention gig work or independent kind of work as well. So to me, there is a slow blurring of what labor market lines are. And in some cases, in some industries, in some occupations, they don't exist at all. Now, part of this is structural with the workforce system. We can have a debate about this, but the workforce system right now is very much focused on employers who are physically in the existing labor market. It is not prepared. We're not prepared to address the needs of workers who work in businesses that don't even exist in this labor market. So the dynamic is there isn't an employer. It's really all about the worker. And so we're not there yet. I mean, it's an emerging issue. And then to go further in terms of gig work, these are individuals who are working in industries, but not in any particular occupation per se. And so understanding what that dynamic is, because they're in some respects a substitution for wage workers, then I think it's something that as this resource evolves, it needs to sort of look at what the modern economy is evolving into, as opposed to what we historically have remembered as an economy from the 20th century. And then finally, just looking at the point of view of one of the things I was telling Tony is I try to get look at this from the point of view, okay, what's actionable. And one other point, and I completely missed this, clusters. So the clusters that are emphasized are clusters that we have a location quotient that is greater than 1. That's as of 2020. But what did we lose in terms of location dominance from the 10 years ago? And to me, that's a relevant question, because it's a legacy cluster that could be revived, could be addressed, should be given priority. And so my question was, what's dropped off the list of clusters in the last 10 years? The other is, it doesn't really address the issue of what is important in terms of functioning economy. So we deal with the tradable clusters, but there are non-tradable clusters that are essential to the economy and to me deserve as much attention as the tradable clusters. So there's no way to access that in terms of the way this thing is built. It's all built on the most, at least in terms of the initial presentation, it's built on the clusters that we have some dominance in terms of looking at in terms of relative data. And then to sort of building off that point, there's a slug of money coming in on infrastructure, energy projects, and so forth. I frankly think that the workforce system as a whole is completely asleep at the wheel at this one, but we'll get into that later at some point. Just if you're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, looking at these opportunities as things to be upfront on, as opposed to react to, because this is really built on sort of a reaction model. Here's what's going on, this is what's happening, then how do we build systems to support that, as opposed to if there are new opportunities coming in. And I'm not sure how you build this into the model, but if there are new opportunities coming in, such as the slug of money coming in infrastructure, transportation, energy, and so forth, where should we be directing attention in terms of anticipating where these investments may be, and then taking an equity lens and saying, and how do we drive this so that in fact we are addressing some of these accessibility issues and so forth. So it's a sort of a here and now example. I think right now a lot of the people are sort of passive on this. They're decisions that are in the process of getting made. And then I think what's happening is we're all looking to see what's going to fall out of it, as opposed to sort of directing what the process looks like. So anyway, so those are some of my initial thoughts.
Thanks, Peter. I really appreciate that. You certainly have given us some homework, but that's exactly why we asked you all to take a look at this tool. And I think as we start to think of our multi-year program focused on economic development and the regional economy, I think, we want to see if we can answer some of these questions, especially in partnership with all of you. So we'd welcome any of your thoughts on some of, our colleagues' comments here, but also I think we're going to be thinking about some of these too, as we look at our next steps internally about what the work's going to look like. Any questions for Peter? I mean, I can dive in and try to address as much of this as possible, but I'd like to give it some thought and work with our team on that too. And also I think I want to respect the time of everybody and the other agenda items today too. But I certainly want to see if there's any questions or comments for Peter. And then we have Kevin Kramer, and then we'll be finished. But anything for Peter?
I had a general question, but I can wait.
Are you sure?
Well, I'm happy to let Kevin go first and get his thoughts out, and then I can ask him.
Okay. Thanks, Kendra. Kevin.
Hold on to that one though, Kendra. Don't forget it. Write it down. I'll be quick because I think a lot of what was said, I agree with most of it, especially in terms of definitions. I think, both for me, quality and accessibility. I think looking at those two, and even if it's just pulling out a thesaurus to start brainstorming, something else for those, because I feel like they have inherent meaning. If you don't read the paragraph on what does it mean, if somebody just pulls up this tool and, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean my job's a low quality? And like Peter was saying, I don't think of the quality of my job necessarily. So maybe there's some other words for that. I was looking at, mostly from the local municipality level of how would I use this. So I kind of targeted, those industry clusters a little bit. It's nice to be able to break them out by the different counties, and especially even though I work in Cook, I live in Kane, but on the border of McHenry. So my local involvement, my home community is elsewhere, and so it's nice to be able to break those down to say, okay, how can I help my local community attract whatever business, and that was the lens I was looking at this, not only from a workforce development for the companies that we might have in town, but also just a general business attraction, to the point where I kind of finished diving into it all, and then said to myself, okay, now that I have this data, what story am I going to tell using it, right? Because that's when I'm marketing Illinois and the region, and then diving further to Hoffman Estates, I'm thinking I've got all this great stuff. What story do I want to tell? Who do I want to tell, and what do I want to tell them about it? And I think there's a lot of ways to use this. I don't have the answer to that question yet. But then the other thing I think on a local level is, all right, now that I have this, what actions do we need to make to either to make changes or to bring about awareness, whether it's to our elected officials, to our workforce base here, our residents, to our even to our companies that we have in town. So I like the flexibility, especially as I got into, I didn't look a ton into the which one is this? I didn't dive a ton into the job quality and accessibility. I was more looking, I guess I was pulled to the industry clusters, which I knew most of because we had just kind of done an exercise in this locally, but it's great to have another kind of confirmation of some of those clusters and then kind of the local context. I love that I could dive down to my zip code here to compare maybe not only Hoffman Estates' zip codes, but all of our northwest suburbs, which is more of our trade area for our businesses, and then even kind of comparing and just seeing where else in the region, how do we compare to some others? And so I love kind of the flexibility of that you give me a lot of choices, that you don't just limit me to, okay, I'm limited to the CMAP region, or even in the context selection. I love that on the sidebar. I can look at the general demographics, but even diving a little bit deeper into computer and internet access, and what are those percentages, especially as a local municipality, they might not realize, holy cow, 30% of our residents in this area have no internet access, or only sell internet access, or no internet access at all. So just realizing, okay, that's where we need to step it up and maybe put some of those dollars toward improving that. Because as Peter mentioned, and that was another note I had, was where does remote work fit into this? And either for the people that are living here and working for a company in Silicon Valley, or living in Wichita but working for a company in Chicago, and how does all that fit in? I'll ditto everybody else's comments on kind of on the just re-looking at the definitions and all of that, and how accessibility and kind of the positives and negatives go into it. But I want to leave time for questions because I see some in the chat. I know Kendra's got one, and I think there's a lot more to dive into. So maybe it's even a task force of this committee to dive in and help staff with just some thoughts going a little bit deeper.
Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate that. And that's a great idea. And so I think you all have given us a lot to think about here, but I think part of our goal here is to, and especially as it fits within the larger framework of our regional economic coordination efforts, is to try and tell the story of our region, or even change the narrative if you think it needs to be changed. And so I think that's the purpose of a lot of this. So I appreciate your local perspective on this too. I think this worked out, and that we got a regional, county, and a local perspective with this tool. And so I think that illustrates that there is value in any of those analyses. But pointing out some of the gaps and some of the things that are missing, or some of the ways that we need to think about how we can connect this to other tools and other data we have, is super helpful. I definitely want to acknowledge that John and Marissa also put in the chat the question about the definitions of quality and accessibility. So you've given us a lot to think about there. I know when I say the word accessibility, I mean probably 3 different things when it comes to that. It's either transportation or this, or even in the words that we use here. So that's super helpful. Kendra, is it time for your question?
Yeah, first I just want to say I really appreciated the approach to this conversation with having people kind of test drive the tool and share their perspectives. That was really helpful for me. So thanks for that. And I hope we continue to kind of lean into these types of conversations in the future versus just presentations. But my question was, have you, a couple of months ago, the state came out with their future work report. So I'm just wondering if you've looked at the alignment between strategies with the statewide report and the recommendations from the companion report, because I mean, there are some things that feel like they could be strongly aligned as far as job quality. And I know one of the recommendations that came out of that was adopting a statewide job quality measurement. So I'm just wondering how those reports talk to each other, how you maybe looked at those reports for opportunities for alignment to continue to create momentum for pathways forward through legislative change. So the MPC obviously was one of the research partners on that. So I'm just wondering how those two align.
I think that's our next move here, although I will certainly ask some of my colleagues from CMAP to weigh in if they've been doing it. But I think one of our next moves here is to take a look at some of the other reports that are out there that are addressing the future of work and even mobility and how people are commuting and getting around, et cetera, and see if we can make those connections. So that's really helpful. And I'm going to take Kevin's suggestion of a task force to heart. And I think maybe I may be calling some of you to see if you're interested in joining me in a task force to take a deeper look at this. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just really quickly to kind of add to my comment in the chat, what is an accessible job in terms of the education level needed to enter that job is pretty well accepted in the LMI field. The definition of how you do that is a very large national conversation where while kudos to seem enormously helpful, I think getting that right, what we mean by job quality and how we correct if this information is being put out. Conversations, even what are the wage thresholds? How do you find the adult, one child? Those kind of things which get baked into those job quality. It would be great for CMAP to take on those issues, but I think that conversation with stakeholders needs to be fleshed out before there's sort of a tool that kind of adopts a job quality definition in some way that might not be aligned with how the state or other stakeholders are.
Thanks, John. You cut out a little bit there at the beginning, but I think what you said was just make sure that we're aligned with the definition on a national level and make sure that we bring the right stakeholders in to have that conversation and ensure that our work is aligned with that and consistent. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Well, I want to thank Dr. McDowell and Marissa Lewis and Peter Kretikos and Kevin Kramer for joining me on this mission of trying something new at the committee meeting. I hope you all found it very intriguing, and the strategy behind this is to pique your interest in this tool. So maybe you will all go back and take a look at it and dive in through your own lens of your work. And so I welcome you all to do that. If you would like to chat with me or join a task force to really dig into this, please let the liaisons know, and you can get in touch with me. Or if you do find something intriguing here that has to do with your work and you want to share a snapshot at a further meeting, I think we'll be talking about this as a larger conversation in other meetings. So we certainly welcome you to come back to us and say, hey, I'd love 5 minutes to chat about my experience. I think this is just super helpful for us, and you've given us some homework, and I cannot thank you enough. And so thank you to my 4 co-presenters today. I really appreciate you trying this out with me. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony, for your work. And again, thank you to the committee members for putting in so much time. Kevin, let's go White Sox, and I'm not taking comment on that. Our next item is an update from staff regarding CMAP's work to develop a transit system report, the plan of action for regional transit. As you recall, this was introduced at our previous meeting. I'll turn it back over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Tucker. My name is Daniel Como. I am a senior transportation policy analyst here at CMAP, and I'm the project manager for this project, the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, which my colleague Elizabeth Scott shared with you in the last meeting, and Aaron mentioned up top. So if you can go to the next slide, we're going to just give a sort of a recap on what this is and why we're here, and then give you some updates on what we've done since we last spoke about it. But I want to emphasize what we are really continuing to communicate throughout this work, which is that we are trying to develop recommendations about the region's transit system, not just for the sake of the transit system, but because of the crucial role that transit plays in our region's mobility, economy, climate, and so much more. And so as we're thinking about the regional transit network, we're thinking about the kinds of mobility that it enables, both for the people that ride it and for all of the travelers throughout the region who have access to the many modes and the less congestion that comes with more transit ridership, the kinds of communities that are possible in terms of compactness and walkability that are made possible by a transit system. We also know that the transit system connects people to jobs, it connects students to school, it connects people to opportunities. And so we view, the support of our transit system as a crucial component of supporting our vibrant and connected regional economy. And then, as we shared with your colleagues who are on the climate committee earlier this week, we also know that transit is a really crucial component to our region's response and adaptation to climate change. That this is one of the most important ways that we can continue to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint and also ensure that we can reduce other kinds of pollution and emissions that are, have negative impacts in the region. And so if you go to the next slide, we are looking ahead, and the reason that we are doing all of this and that the state legislature tasked us with this is that the transit system faces what is now commonly being called a fiscal cliff. So as federal aid, which is currently supporting the system, runs out, which is expected to happen at the end of 2025, the system is facing something on the order of a $730 million operating budget deficit in 2026. And that's not including any additional investments that we might want to make to improve the system so that we're not just returning to the status quo that we had before the pandemic. This is coming from a lot of reasons. Transit ridership is down coming out of the pandemic, both because of increased levels of remote work, as well as just other changes and habits and preferences that have shifted over the last 2 years. I'm sure you've also experienced or seen in the press people's concerns and perceptions about reliability of service and safety and security and cleanliness on the system. These are all in the mix. They are all contributing to lower levels of ridership, which is reducing the amount of fare revenue that the system is generating. And this is leading to a pretty large anticipated budget gap. I'm actually, if you can go to the next slide, the reason that we are talking about this now is that, something that people might say is, oh, well, we should just, that's a 20% budget gap. Why don't we just cut 20% of the service? Why don't we just raise fares by 20%? And actually, because the system has fixed costs, we can't just cut service by 20% to save 20% of costs. It looks more like a 40% cut to yield that level of savings. And that's the kind of change to our system that we think could lead to a downward spiral of lower ridership, which leads to lower fare revenue, which leads to more cuts in service, and on and on. And that, in our view, is unacceptable. It would leave our system, as a shell of its former self. And we really think that it's important to talk now about the scale of the crisis that we are facing and the importance of thinking about how we respond now so that the system is set up, for success as the federal aid runs out later this decade. Now, if you can go to the next slide. We are focusing on a lot of topics in this work, and this is by law. The General Assembly has given us a detailed plan of what they want us to work on. So the things that are highlighted here are directly from the text. We're not paraphrasing. We need to look at the long-term financial viability of the region's transit network, ensuring that it is comprehensive, that it is coordinated, safe, secure, clean, efficient, and that it fosters and supports efficient land use. As we're doing that, we also have to think about the important topics of racial equity, climate change, economic development, and the very related and complementary work that the RTA has been doing through their strategic planning efforts over the last couple of years. The legislature called out a few things that we will, some of which we'll talk about with you today, that we have to focus on in this work. Things like the recovery ratio, how much of the system's operating costs are generated by fares, and other system-generated revenues. Also, things like the sales tax, the regional sales tax that supports transit, how it is gathered, what the rate is, and how it is distributed, the governance of the system as a whole, how people pay for the system, what they pay for the system, and then anything else. And so we have a rather broad remit, and we're going to be thinking about a number of topics consistent with the focus areas that the legislature has laid out for us. If you can go to the next slide, please. So, when we last talked to you, this project was still in the planning phase. We have now actually officially launched. We had the first meeting of the steering committee of this effort last week on January 18th. And so that is now fully underway. Between now and the summer, we will be discussing with that steering committee and with other bodies, including yourself, in terms of what sorts of topics and recommendations we might consider in the final report. That report is going to be brought to CMAP's board and NPO policy committee for consideration and approval at their joint October meeting. And then we will be submitting it to the legislature on or before its statutory due date of January 1st, 2024. So we have a busy year ahead of us, and we will be coming back to you again throughout the year to talk about our progress on this work. Next slide, please. Just to highlight, we kicked off last week. If you're interested, and I will post in the chat after this meeting, we do have a press release and some more information on the launch, including, I see there's a question. Yes, we can provide you with a list of the steering committee members. If you can go to the next slide, the steering committee has 27 members that represent a variety of sectors and places and perspectives from throughout the region. The legislation actually called out explicitly the kinds of perspectives that we needed to include. So we have representatives from community, civic, labor, environmental, and business organizations as part of that broader steering committee. But of course, we will also be engaging with our own committees and the various public sector bodies that we work with through our transportation committee, through the NTO policy committee, and then our subject matter committees with you and with the climate committee. So some updates from where we were last. Since that presentation, we've started to develop what we will be using as principles to guide the development of a recommendation. One of them is really focusing on ensuring that the system is financially viable in 2026 and beyond. We do not want to be coming back to this as 5 years later. This is not meant to be a fix it now and have to fix it again in 2028. We really want to identify recommendations that will support a financially sustainable system. That does mean that one thing that we are probably not going to be focusing as much on in this work is significant capital expansion. We are focused on the operating crisis that the system is facing. And so this is where we're going to focus our energy. There will be other venues, other long-term regional planning processes, both here and in other places throughout the region, that will continue to focus on those topics, which we think are really important. But we are really focused on how we can address the crisis of 2026 and do so sustainably. We're going to be looking at recommendations where the state has a particularly important role. This is a report to the state legislature. And so that's something that's going to be top of mind for us. As I already said, we're looking to rebuild a system that is stronger than the one that we had before the pandemic. We don't want to just get back to where we were. We know there were problems and challenges that the system faced even before the strains caused by COVID. As we think about that, we will be especially centering the perspective of the people that use the system and making sure that they see a better system coming out of COVID. And something that we have told to our steering committee members and that the legislators who sponsored this legislation shared in that kickoff meeting is that they are encouraging us to be bold and to not be afraid of proposing big ideas, that the system is facing significant challenges and addressing them may require significant solutions. And so we are not looking to constrain ourselves at the outset. The next slide has some more detail on the kinds of topics that we're going to be considering as part of this work. I think one thing that I want to emphasize before I go into the specifics here is that we do not view this simply as a report to identify a package of new revenues to fill a revenue hole. We are thinking about what kinds of solutions can improve the system and ensure that it meets the needs of our region. So we have organized them into 3 different buckets. One of them is topics related to improving the system, which we're calling the system we want. That's things like bolstering public confidence in the system, getting people back on transit and improving the experience for those who are still on it today, speeding up our region's bus service, addressing things like integrated and affordable fare structures throughout the region, between and across transit providers, potentially exploring new topics like migrating toward a regional rail model that serves new travel markets throughout the day and throughout the region, and supporting that with investments in transit supportive land use, both for residential and commercial development. And finally, on this topic, we have some work to do as a region in terms of our ADA accessibility. And so we're going to be highlighting ways in which we can leverage new and recently made available federal funds and state funds for those ends. In terms of how to pay for it, we're going to be looking at both new revenues and reforms that can help to close the anticipated budget gap, as well as pay for any incremental costs of reforms. So we're going to be looking at things like the sales tax, which my colleague Elizabeth Ginsburg will lead a discussion about in just a moment. We're also going to be thinking about revenues from the road system, things like tolls, congestion pricing, and broader potential state reforms. We're also going to be looking at what the system can generate and thinking about what our region's fair policy means in terms of long-term revenues that we can expect from that source. We'll also be trying to quantify any operational savings that are coming out of changes from system improvements or other ways that we can bend the cost curve to reduce the long-term growth in terms of operating costs. And while we are not counting on the federal government to continue their support, we will be considering what avenues might be most productive to pursue for federal, federal support after the current round of COVID aid expires. Finally, we're going to be looking at some topics that we've called how to implement it. This is a set of topics related to governance and funding distribution, and how we can have a system that is consistent with and aligned with the types of changes that we're talking about in the other two topic areas. So we'll be looking at topics like funding allocation, the distribution of decision-making, operating, planning responsibilities, and the technical aspects of something that's called the fare box recovery ratio requirement, which is the current way in which the state requires the system to recover a large share of its operating costs from fare revenue. So I'll hand it over to Elizabeth, who's going to share some more detail on the sales tax work specifically, since we thought that might be a topic that would be of especially large interest to this group.
Thanks, Daniel. Sales tax reform in particular and the expansion of the sales tax base to include consumer services has been a recommendation that CMAP has been working on since Go to 2040. And potential benefits include not only increased funding for transit operations, but a more balanced land use mix throughout the region and improved horizontal equity for residents, since higher income earners tend to spend more of their incomes on services and less, or a higher share on services and a lower share on goods than lower income earners. To do this work for the PART effort, CMAP has contracted with SB Friedman, and SB Friedman has been asked to evaluate the costs, benefits, and implications of reforms related to increasing the RTA sales tax and broadening the state and/or the RTA sales tax to include consumer services. Their analysis will need to account for the impacts of cross-border competition, different local land use patterns, tax incidence shifts, and the racial and regional equity implications of increasing sales tax revenues. Ultimately, SB Friedman will be working with the Financial Sustainability Discussion Group to make recommendations on which services should be taxed and how the reform should be implemented. Given all of that, we wanted to ask you all for some input on what the team should keep top of mind as we identify potential sales tax proposals for PART. Christy?
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask you to clarify when you talk about SB Friedman's work and you mentioned increasing RTA sales tax, and then I believe it was a separate statement about broadening the sales tax. Are those two separate potential, or are you seeing that as one? I wasn't sure if the increasing the sales tax was essentially just the service taxes, or you were looking at increasing rate of recovery or something like that.
You cut out a little bit, but I just wanted, so to restate your question, you're asking kind of, is it just the RTA sales tax? Is it the state sales tax? And essentially, we're asking SB Friedman to consider all scenarios. So that could be just increasing the RTA sales tax as it currently is being applied to goods and some services. That could be just extending the RTA sales tax to additional consumer services. But given that this is the sales tax is administered and impacts the state as a whole, we're also asking them to look at the extending the overall state sales tax to consumer services and all variations of above.
And I'll just to add on to that point, this is something that we're building off of work that both we and the RTA had done over the last couple of years on this front. And so you may have seen the RTA has released its draft strategic plan, and they outlined a list of potential revenue opportunities, and they distinguish between increasing the rate as it is and broadening the base with the current rate. And so that's the same frame that we are taking. As Elizabeth said, we're studying a lot of different potential options separately, but also thinking about how they might work together or combine with other sources. The scale of the gap that we are talking about is large enough that it is likely that this will be a package of potential solutions and not just one that addresses the problems.
Can I ask a follow-up? I'm sorry. You may have stated this, Elizabeth, but I had a little bit of a connection problem, so I might have missed it. Is it also including expansion of eligible geography for the sales tax collection, or is that remaining static and you're looking within the existing footprint?
For the RTA sales tax specifically, Christy?
Correct.
I don't think we're considering any changes in the geography.
Okay, thank you.
And
Peter?
something I would highlight on that, one area in which this has come up is around the idea of system expansions that would cover addition. Currently the RTA sales tax is applied to the 6 counties that have transit services provided through the RTA service boards. And so we are not using this process to talk about significant system expansion that might trigger those kinds of conversations about additional geographies that would pay into the RTA sales tax.
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
Just as an aside, I'll just mention, we've SSMMA, South Suburban Mayors and Managers, has taken a position on that, particularly, for non-participants having expansion without, having historic contributions going into the system. Happy to share that in case that's helpful to your dialogue at all.
Certainly, if you'd like to send that along, I would welcome it.
Okay, Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of thoughts. On the sales tax issue in particular, it's in my mind, it's just going to be impossible to divorce RTA from the statewide discussion and on expansion of sales tax to include services, at least politically. I mean, we may be able to do that in terms of analysis and so forth, but I just there have been over several years so many different calls for expansion of the sales tax by municipalities, by other entities, by other units of government, by the state itself, that it seems to me that it would be you're not going to separate it out. But to the point of the sales tax, so one of the concerns I have about how the structure of financing exists today is that it has been largely reliant on a series of regressive financial tools. The fare box recovery ratio was established in the 80s, largely in my estimation, and I was in lots of those back rooms, in my estimation, was as a punitive measure against the CTA. And it had a lot to do with the perceived ridership, and especially the color of the ridership, as well as the employment of the people at CTA, as driving some of that. It's driving some of that issue in terms of setting a fare box recovery ratio that no other place has been. There's no transit system in the country that has that kind of demand on it. And then you build on top of it a funding mechanism that relies largely on sales tax, which is also regressive. That we're essentially building the system, and we have built a system that that really puts the burden on a certain portion of the population. And so I would strongly encourage looking at, alternative funding streams, and especially looking at the consequences of the fare box recovery ratio in terms of, in terms of the quality of service, the extent of service, and so forth, for people who rely on public transportation the most. The other issue that I sort of want to, and it may be just a matter of presentation, more than anything else. The fundamental challenges that the RTA had since its inception has been over the perception of service. Of all, are all areas of the region being well served by the system. And, they structure the initial funding so that, the areas that were less well served, or at least the perception was, didn't have to pay as much. And so I think that the discussion around the future of the RTA, as you look at it, or regional transit, as you look at it, should really begin with a discussion around service. And using a word from the last discussion, accessibility and the like. Then I think that helps to sort of define the parameters of the financing discussion. Because I think that it's the sort of the policy issue is how well served is the region, how well served can the region be, and then you build your financing around that, and that builds your argument in terms of how you pay for it. So I think by putting the money first, it sort of misses the point of why you're trying to do this, and that's just an observation.
So there's a lot there to respond to. Appreciate all of those comments. I'll try to respond to the ones that I remember in order. We certainly will be considering the equity implications of different revenue streams, and certainly the regressivity of the sales tax is something that we are cognizant of and will be thinking about in the context of different potential revenue sources for transit. As this list indicates, sales tax is one of the things that we are looking at, but it is certainly not the only thing. And so we are, thinking about that as one potential factor to consider whenever deciding which potential solutions to recommend. The broader conversations around the fare box recovery ratio, there was a question in the chat, if I could explain that, so I will do that briefly. So by statute, the region's transit service providers have to make up roughly, they have to make 50% of their operating costs with system generated revenues. This is mostly, although not entirely, from fares. They can also do this through things like ads and leasing space on their system. And so that is an unusual requirement. Most systems in the US do not have a required recovery ratio, and those that do, it's typically much lower. Potentially and partially as a result, our system has a relatively high rate of recovery. It's not the highest, but we do have a pretty large share of our operating budget that is generated by fares. It's not actually 50% because there are some things that aren't counted and excluded, like paratransit service, but it does mean that a lot of our funding comes from fares. And so this doesn't necessarily have an automatic impact on revenue, but we have built a funding structure in which we assume that fares will play a very large role. And so if the fare revenue goes down, like it has during the COVID-19 pandemic, there is not an automatic additional pool of public money that is there to make up the difference. The federal government did that with its COVID aid, but once the federal aid runs out, the state is not going to step in automatically and fix it. And actually, with the current recovery ratio, they would not be allowed to step in and fix it. They would have to change that requirement. So that's the relationship between the recovery ratio and revenue. Changing the recovery ratio does not automatically give the system more money. And so we would any change to the recovery ratio also needs to change the fundamental funding structure or operating structure to match available revenues to service. But that is it's a complex relationship, and as Peter points out, it is an unusual requirement here in our region. The broader conversation about what kind of service and what kind of transit service we want in our region is an important one. It's something that the RTA has been considering and working on through their strategic planning process. There were discussions in there about what kinds of service can be provided at different parts of the region, different scales of land use and density. We anticipate that those conversations will continue. I think we are cognizant of the time that we have available to finish this report, and so there are some things that we are going to have to work on and identify specific recommendations as part of this process, and some things that we may get to a general principle and not have the time to go into the level of detail that ultimately will be needed. I do think that as we think about the recommendations that we are going to be putting forward through this process, we are not necessarily wedded to everything being exactly the way that it is today. And so we will be considering the ways in which the system can provide better service, better connections throughout the region. But fundamentally, we do know that we will need to have a transit system that has the resources and the ability to continue to provide service at the scale that we have come to expect and rely on here in the region. And so we are working now to try to identify solutions to those problems, even while some of the specifics we're going to have to continue to work on. And I see another comment from Peter in the chat about the fare box recovery ratio. Yes, it certainly has broad implications. The different service boards have different recovery ratios that they meet by arrangement between the bodies, and so it's not all the same throughout the region, and especially paratransit has a different kind of arrangement. But it's something that we're going to be looking closely at as part of this work and identifying more analysis and more recommendations on those topics.
And I do, we have one more question, but I just wanted to talk about the sales tax regressivity piece really quick. I know that this has been a recommendation of CMAP for a long time, and it doesn't fill the full gap, but there are other benefits to exploring this question now, largely in relation to expanding the sales tax to consumer services for the state as a whole. And I think that speaks to, Peter, your point about how we cannot really divorce the RTA sales tax from the larger state sales tax, and the benefits of looking at the state sales tax in conjunction with the RTA sales tax. Reshare my screen. I think Daniel had one more question for the group.
Yeah, and I think some of this already came out through the discussion. But if there are other comments here, one of the objectives of this work is to identify a set of stable revenues to support the transit system. And that in mind, we'd be curious if you have any other reactions on the objectives or issues identified in the how to pay for it section of the topics that we were just reviewing, and if there's any that you would modify or add beyond the comments that have already been raised. Well, thank you all for your input. We will think about it and think about how to incorporate these kinds of things in our work going forward. As I am sure you can guess, we have lots of stakeholders and partners in this work. And so we will be, in addition to continuing to provide updates to you and to the other CMAP committees, we're going to be meeting regularly and providing updates to a whole host of individuals and organizations throughout the region, public sector agencies, legislators, stakeholders, advocates, media, academia. And so there's going to be many conversations. You may see us in other forums in your other professional capacities. And so we look forward to continuing to engage with you over the coming months. Next slide, please. The specific next steps are that we will be, as I said, doing a lot of engagement, both with you and with stakeholders. We are going to be working now to prepare for the next meeting of the large steering committee, which is going to be held, I believe, on March 15th, following up from the kickoff, which was last week. We're also going to be developing a series of white papers and research and policy papers on different topical issues across all of the different topics that I outlined, and we'll be doing that as part of the broader development of the content of the report, its recommendations and proposals for the General Assembly. The next slide is just the contact information for the team that is leading this work. In addition to myself, we have Laura Wilkeson, Amy Lee, and Bill Barnes, who are the executive team members most heavily involved, and then Elizabeth Scott is the program manager. If you have any questions about this work, please feel free to reach out to any of us or to Elizabeth Ginsburg about any of the questions related to the sales tax that she shared with you today. And that is it, I believe. So I want to thank you for your time and your engagement and your input. We really do appreciate it. I look forward to continuing to work with you on this over the course of this year.
Thank you, Daniel. Some really sobering information in there, but thankful for you and your team putting in the work on this. Let's move on now to committee member updates. Tara, I think you're going to kick us off.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to make a brief announcement that the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways is pleased to announce that we are currently accepting applications for our 2023 Invest in Cook Transportation Grant Program. So previously, at previous meetings, I have, given a short overview of the value of this program and, what it can provide to Cook County communities. So we're really excited about it. This is our 7th consecutive year of the program. The deadline for applications is Friday, March 17th, and more information can be found on the website. I will work on getting that dropped into the chat. And there also is a virtual webinar offered for potential applicants. That is next week, Wednesday, February 1st from 1 until 4. This call for projects is also being done in conjunction with the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG program. So the Invest in Cook portion of that webinar will be right at the front end between 1 and 2. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if any one of you or your colleagues have any questions about this program. And thank you for the opportunity to mention it today. Back to you, Bob.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. Michael.
Yeah, good morning, Bob. Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody else. Similar to Tara's announcement, the RTA also had a call for projects. And just want to offer a quick plug that we now have a public comment period that is open for 6 projects that were selected out of 11 applications submitted to our community planning program from last fall. Just a little update, the program really provides funding, technical assistance for transit-oriented planning and implementation initiatives throughout the region with local partners, primarily municipalities, with the goal of really fostering growth, sustainability, transit-friendly communities, walkability around transit assets, and encouraging transit-supportive land uses. So just a quick overview of the 6 projects that we're selecting. One project, actually 2 projects to think through establishing special municipal finance districts in partnership with the University Park, Village of University Park, and also the City of Geneva. Really the funding of which could go towards advancing economic development or infrastructure that's needed to support that in the context of their transit services. A mobility improvement and development action plan with the Village of Riverdale in the south suburbs. Another development strategy plan for downtown Joliet, really adjacent to sections near the Joliet Gateway Center, which is a hub for PACE, Metra, and Amtrak for that matter. Thinking through and supporting the development of a mobility hub in partnership with Equiticity to really advance access for residents in the Bronzeville neighborhood near the 51st Street Green Line station. And then also finally, working with the City of Des Plaines to convene a panel of developers really from the private sector to help provide their insight and guidance to city leaders about the current market for development really is focused on areas near Lee and Oakton Streets where Pace Pulse Service will be opening a station. So I'll leave it at that. I'll also drop a link in the chat. Really encourage you to kind of go through anything, make a comment, share the link, and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Good stuff, Michael. Any questions for Michael or any other member updates at this point? I'll remind folks that in future meetings, if you do, just drop Elizabeth a note and we can get you queued up. Is there any new business to come before the committee today? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to public comment. Staff is going to read any comments received prior to today's meeting and recognize those speakers in the chat box. Staff, do we have any?
Sorry, one sec, Garland. We did not receive comments prior to today's meeting. Just as a reminder, if you wish to address the committee, please indicate so in the chat box, and you will be called on one at a time. Garland, please go ahead.
Happy New Year to you, everybody. This is Garland Armstrong, along with my wife, Heather Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, Illinois, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. Just want you to know that Heather had a birthday on New Year's Day, and then this coming Sunday, we're celebrating our 19th wedding anniversary. And Heather has a comment she wanted to say. Hold on.
Hello, my name is Heather Armstrong. I also live in Des Moines, Iowa. I think Illinois should have like these like bottle and can recycling programs along with glass. They need to have that recyclable program so it would give money to the government, to the state government. Plus two, whenever you go to the store, you would get like either 5 cents back or your 10 cents back per recyclable. I think that's a good idea that they need to have there in Illinois.
And this is Garland back again. I remember that program when in the 70s, they used to have a glass thing where we got our refund, and just would like to know what happened to that. They should bring it back right now in the 21st century, along with plastic and glass vending thing to recycle, especially with the state right now. It feels like it's in a fiscal cliff. They should use that and use the data of it so that they can make sure to update it and get the program up and running. Because, and when I was living in New York in the 80s, they had it really good, and they kept up with it. So, and it was an awesome program that people got their refunds back of it and New York was doing really so well in the 80s. And I think it's time right now for Illinois to catch up on it, and so that they won't discontinue it, because people in different communities says they need a refund and we need it right now. It's long overdue, and the 21st century right here, so that they'll say a recycling program, that's what they need, and they need it right now. And they said why they discontinue it, and who was the person who said to discontinue the program, and when will they bring it back to make it better and make some adjustments and new improvements on it. So we need that right now so that people will say, finally, and they should make it a year program or pilot program. And if it goes well, then they should implement it and make it permanent, because people will say they don't want to lose any money. So when will they be able to get more refunds for themselves? So that's my suggestion of it.
Garland, thank you so much, both to you and Heather. And my gosh, it is always so good to see both of you. We are all hoping you are doing well. And thank you always for contributing, and we appreciate your commentary.
Thanks, Bob. And we'll be back in the Chicagoland area in April or May. So we hope we can see you guys in person again. So at the new post office for CMAP. So it'll be so emotional to see y'all again and make us feel so proud to welcome us back, and so be so emotional for us.
Well, that sounds great, my friend. You be well in the meantime. Do we have any other public comment for today? All right, just a reminder that the next meeting is April 27th. Mark your calendars. And if there's no other business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Have a great day, everyone. Good seeing everyone. Be well.